Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Fridays with Keenan's Cutting Edge, where we discuss all things edge and have fun doing it. My name is Jenna Labor, and I will be your host as we explore the dynamic world of Don Keenan's trial philosophy, The Cutting Edge. Those of you joining us live this afternoon are receiving early bird access to this episode. So you have the opportunity to ask questions and interact with our speaker. If you happen to be unable to join us, however, live, episodes will be released each week following the live broadcast. So be sure to hit that subscribe button and click the alerts icon to make sure you don't miss an episode. Today, we have Bijan Darvish with us speaking on representing police officers. Mr. Darvish practices employment law out in California. You know, I always have students in my KTI college courses who want more employment-specific edge info, and Bijan is your guy in California. So we'll put a link to his website as well as his contact information in the comments below, so you can reach out to him with any employment-specific edge questions in California. Bijan, please tell us about your experience with representing police officers and how edge helps you put forward your best case in employment cases.
Good afternoon, everybody. When Jenna got a hold of me and asked me to talk about a topic, I was excited. And she said we kind of have broad range on what we could talk about. So I wanted to talk about something that's near my heart, and that's representing police officers. Let me tell you a little bit of background about myself. Before I was a lawyer, I was a police officer for about 12 years. I worked at 2 different agencies. I served on the police associations, the unions, all different seats on there, from vice president to the president of one association. I also did a ancillary duty, and one of those was a trauma support team. And that is when something traumatic happens to an officer, whether they're involved in a shooting or someone passes away, a baby dies, anything like that, anything traumatic, we'll respond, and we work under the license of a psychologist and provide support for them that night to help try to reduce the effects of some PTSD or other stress issues. My career ended after I hurt my back. I had it fused a few times, and ultimately I had to retire from there, and I became a lawyer, primarily to try to continue to work with police and help them. I do employment law. I've represented well over 200-300 police officers in civil matters, administrative matters. And to help prepare for today, I did a little bit of research. I reached out to different police associations, different police unions. I did some little quasi focus groups. I spoke to 53 different police officers from different agencies. I spoke to them individually. I asked them questions about their expectations that they have when they're seeking out legal representations. I'll go over some of those responses with you today. I'll go over some of the concerns that police officers have. And I'll also discuss some trust about building trust with police officers, as we do with any other client. And I'll talk about why that's specifically important when we're representing police officers. And to prepare for today, I spoke to police psychologists to get some input from them on how to help better facilitate the relationship between an officer and their attorney. I'll talk a little bit about witness prep that we do with clients, but I'm not a witness prep instructor, so make sure you don't deviate from what you learn at the colleges and whatnot. So understanding the concerns that officers have. It is in our line of practice, unless we're doing some type of assembly line type of practice where people come in and we don't really care about them and we're pushing them out. We try not to do that with the Edge, and we want to actually learn about our clients. And this is regardless of who the client is, right? So it doesn't really make a difference whether it's a police officer, a nurse, a doctor, a CEO, someone who works at a fast food restaurant, or someone that doesn't have a job or they're homeless. We want to learn about our clients regardless of who they are. It's important to learn about their concerns and understand their expectations. Now, I'll start with some of the expectations that officers have when they're seeking legal representation. When I spoke to the union or association leaders of the different agencies, there was a common theme of the number one complaint that officers had when it came to representation. And this might be for everybody, not just officers, but that, mine was focused in on my research was focused in on the officers. And the number one concern was lack of communication. These officers are trained that they show up on time from day one when they start their academy. They show up on time. They're dressed appropriately. They're professional. If a meeting starts at 2, they're there at 2 or they're there early. It's a paramilitary organization, so promptness is important to them. And they have those same expectations when it comes to meeting us. So they want us to be on time. They want us to communicate with them. They want to be kept in the loop. And it seems like they want to be kept in the loop more than the average person who's not a police officer. And that might be because of strong personalities. There's a lot of type A personalities involved. They have experience with the judicial system. It might be in a criminal, it's more likely in a criminal context than it is in a civil, but they understand generally how the court system works. They have a general understanding of how depositions work. And because they have this knowledge, they want to be kept in the loop more to know how the process is going along. I always give my cell phone number out to every single officer that I have as a client. I know a lot of lawyers don't do this. They just give the office number out, but I think it's important. It helps build that trust. It makes for easier communication. It's much quicker, doesn't take as much time. It's efficient. I can respond to them quickly. And it satisfies their desire for communication. And they trust that when they call or when they text, they're going to get a response quickly. I want to talk a little bit about some of the fears that officers have with doing their job. And when I did these, I call them focus groups, I didn't do them in a group environment because I didn't want anyone to get influenced by the answers of the other participants. So I talked to them each individually over a period of a few weeks. And I asked them what their number one's fear was in relation to their job. And this is important to know. It's important to know because it relates to the damages that we're seeking out. Meaning if an officer is harassed or discriminated at work, and I'll go into this a little more at the end, but they don't typically expect these types of things to happen. They're trained that they could get in a shooting, they can get assaulted and things like that. And sometimes they can even expect these things to happen. It doesn't diminish the stress they receive from those things, but they can at least expect those things to happen. They don't expect to be discriminated or harassed at work. And it's also important to know what their fears are so we can help gain some knowledge when we do the guilt phase in our witness prep. And we don't want these fears coming out in a particular case when it's on cross-examination or something. And we want to find out if there's guilt associated with any of these fears. And these are all important things to know about our clients when we're representing officers. So the results of my focus groups were I spoke to, it's a small sample, but it's 53 different officers. And 33 of them, and that's about 62%, said their major fear was they had a fear of being second guessed and then being charged with something criminal. And that doesn't mean anything like stealing money or drugs or anything like that, but it was all in regard to using some type of force. And over the past few years, we've seen this issue become much more open in the public. There's cameras everywhere. They're wearing body-worn cameras. There's surveillance videos everywhere. So every time they use force, it's really scrutinized. And their fear is that they do something, use some type of force in good faith, believing it was necessary. And then it turns out that they were wrong, that it was not actually necessary. Now, their perception was that it was necessary, and it turns out that it wasn't. So that was the number one fear that they had. The second fear they had, and this was 13 out of the 53 officers I spoke with, it's about 25%, said they had a fear of getting killed on the job. And this was not getting killed in an ambush when they're sitting in their car or something like that, or in a shootout. It was more a fear of getting killed when there's a delay in a response by them, meaning they have this fear that if they do the wrong thing, they're going to get prosecuted, they're going to get in trouble, they're going to be all over the news. So they're taking these extra time, this extra delay, and trying to analyze the situation. And their fear is that that delay could cost them their life. And the third most common fear they had, and this was out of the 53 officers, it was about 14% of them, 15%, said they had a fear that the department wouldn't support them, would retaliate against them for things. Meaning that if they felt that they reported something to the department, that the department would come after them because it makes the department, it shows them in a bad light. Regardless of how we feel about the police using force on people, whether it be punches, strikes, or using their firearm, and we can argue about whether or not certain things are reasonable or not. What's important for us today to understand is that if we're going to represent them, we need to understand these concerns to build trust with them. Because if we can't build trust with them, then we're not going to have that solid attorney-client relationship. And this kind of takes us to when we're doing witness prep or when we're doing our initial intake with them. We have to build that trust, because to them, we're an outsider coming into their world. They're less trusting of lawyers. If you think about it, most of their experience with lawyers is not great. Okay, they're getting either sued and getting deposed, or they're getting cross-examined by a defense lawyer that's criticizing their work. And part of the reasons they're less trusting also is that we haven't been in their shoes. We haven't seen the things that they've seen. And most of them And the psychologist that I spoke with, they confirmed this, and they said, if we try to BS them, if we try to mislead them in any way, or if we're not forthcoming with information, they can see through that. They can recognize that we don't care, and it will ruin the relationship. And understanding their fears and concern, and that's one way of starting to earn that trust. We're often more familiar, for myself, I'm more familiar with the people I've been around. There's lawyers that used to be doctors, and they're more familiar with the doctors, representing doctors, and they can understand what they've been through. But one of the most important things, and this is what at least two of the psychologists confirmed with me, is try to stay away from making judgmental comments. The use of force subjects are very delicate these days for them. If we're going to talk about them, we should know what we're talking about. Their position, the officers, is that, hey, we have to make a split-second decision. If we're right, we're a hero. If we're wrong, someone dies, or we could end up going to prison. So it's a very serious topic for them, and very sensitive topic for them. There was a story out about a year or two ago, I think it was in New Mexico or Arizona somewhere, where the officers went to this call of a subject acting suspicious. This guy they didn't know if he was drunk or high on drugs, but somebody said he had a jacket wrapped around his hand. You couldn't see what he had in his hand. They said it could be a gun, but they don't know. They never saw it. And the cops get there and they see it. The hand is covered by the jacket. They tell him to drop the jacket. He doesn't. He kind of raises it up towards them like this. And there's a pause. The officers don't do anything. They're waiting because they didn't see the gun. And it ended up actually being a gun under there, and the bad guy shot at them. Now, luckily he missed. They shot back. But, their representatives were talking how these guys were concerned, and there was this delay that could have got them killed because they weren't sure if that was a gun or not. And, they had this fear that they were going to get in trouble. They were going to go to jail if they made the wrong decision. And if that guy would have shot straight, it could have cost them their life. So it's an important topic to them. It's important for us to understand if we're going to represent these guys. If anybody here does any type of civil rights lawsuits, excessive force claims, be honest with them and let them know at intake. When you talk to them, say, hey, I've done these types of cases before, and that will help build the trust. And most of them, if you're upfront with them and let them know, they probably won't have an issue with it, because they're coming to us because they have a problem. They feel like they've been wronged. So be honest, be forthcoming with them. And a lot of these concerns that I'm bringing up, they're not secrets. They're all over the news. You hear different political sides talking about them. They're talking points. But they're important for us to understand and to deal with, because if we don't deal with these things, if we don't deal with these fears and these concerns during witness prep or other portions of our case, then some slick defense attorney is going to find out about them. It's going to find out about their concerns, their fears, and they're going to cut our damages in half or more than that by having the officers testify about all these horrible things that Bubba doesn't deal with on a day-to-day basis. That cops are stressed. They're worried that they could die, they could get shot, they can get stabbed, they can go to prison. All sorts of these things. I don't want to get into too many stories, but we need to find out what the traumatic incidents that these officers were involved in. We need to do that at witness prep once we've built some trust with them. I had an officer that I represented years ago, and in witness prep, when we were going through the guilt phase, it was related to, it wasn't the guilt phase, it was when we're going through the damages of stress, and it came out. He said, 3 or 4 years ago, I had to do CPR on a baby and the baby passed. And this is a grown man, an officer for, I think he was on 21, 22 years at the time, and started crying in my office. And he said, till this day, 3, 4 years later, I can still taste the child's spit in their mouth, and it almost tasted like formula, baby formula. And that's 3, 4 years later, he still describes that very articulately. And if any of us think that defense attorneys aren't going to exploit the hell out of that, then we're out of our minds. And all the stress from that, if we don't prepare them properly, if we don't find out about these traumatic incidents, they're going to bring that out, and they're going to say all the stress that our client has is from these other incidents and not from, whatever we're suing for, whether it be discrimination or a car wreck. And they will not open up to us unless we build that trust. It's kind of like if anyone's ever gone out there and spoke with a Marine that's been out to war, and you ask them what happened, tell me about it. They're going to tell you to pound sand. We haven't been in their shoes. We haven't built their trust. It's so important that we do that. A little bit about the guilt phase during witness prep. It's been very difficult for me at times with some of these clients to get answers from them. I often get responses that, hey, I don't feel guilty about anything. I was the one that was harassed. I was the one that was retaliated against. I was the one discriminated. I don't feel guilty about anything. I didn't do anything wrong. But we know it's in there. I mean, everybody has it. It's deep in there. It's taken me a lot longer when I'm representing officers to get through this guilt phase than it does with other people. And they keep saying, hey, I don't have any guilt. I don't have any guilt. And we sit there through silence, just staring at each other. And we have to do this. We have to push through, because these long silences when we're in front of one another are very, very awkward. And it seems like it's going by very slow. And there's times when I'm very annoyed. I just want to say, fine, you don't have guilt, then we'll move on. But I know it's not the right thing. And again, I'm not a witness prep instructor, so I don't want to overstep any of my boundaries here. But it does take a lot of patience with these officers. We have to help them be successful in the case, to get all this emotions out. We have to push through it, and we have to sit there and wait until they come out with it. And the ones that I've experienced where there's been this long silence, there's this been almost battle of getting it out of them, the guilt is big. It's bigger, it's emotional for them. They break down, and for many of them, it's not a position that they enjoy being in. Again, they're type A personalities. They don't want to be in a position that they believe makes them vulnerable. But the only way they're going to get to that position is if we build the trust with them. If we don't build any type of trust, I sound like a broken record, but if we don't build the trust, then we're not going to be able to properly represent them. Some other issues as far as testimony and witness prep when representing these officers. They have, most of the time, they have more experience than the average person because they've been in court often. But some concerns that I've had with experience is that a lot of them will provide only yes or no responses. And that's because that's how they were taught. They're taught that if they ask you if you own a car, your response is yes. It's not, yes, I have a Chevy Tahoe. And sometimes we want them to answer more. We want them to give more answers than just the yes or no. So we have to work with them. We have to keep in mind that a lot of them are trained to provide these short responses only. Another issue that's come up in my cases is especially during live testimony and trial, is sometimes they answer questions very, very literally, meaning they listen to every word of the question and they take it very literally. And that can be hurtful at times for us. And it causes us as lawyers representing these officers to have to go back and try to clarify things. An example I had was when my client was asked, during your shift when you were a police officer, have you ever driven to the Walgreens at this street? And he said no. And then they show a video of him and his partner in a police car. The client was in the passenger seat, pulling up in front of this Walgreens. And their questions didn't give him an opportunity to explain, but the questions were then, is this you in the car? You were working during this shift and this is the Walgreens? Yes. And the officer is taking that question of during your shift, have you ever driven to the Walgreens very literally, meaning he's thinking, I didn't drive, so my answer is no. So, I have to go back and do this explanation to the jury, have him explain literally why he answered that way. And there's a potential for losing people. I've had similar situations where I focus grouped their responses when they provide these literal responses. And the focus groups, some of them say that, hey, I think the witness is trying to be evasive. Why wouldn't they answer it this way? Because they're trained to be very literal when they speak. Then the reports, if they write a report, the defense attorneys go through their reports word by word. So we have to keep this in mind when we're doing witness prep with our clients. We have to let them know that, hey, you can answer don't take this question so literally. And you can speak when you talk. You don't have to just say yes or no answers. That one in particular, it was my fault because I didn't prep him properly, but he could have responded, well, I've been there in a car before, but I didn't drive. And that takes away any perception by the jurors or anyone else that the witness is being evasive in any way. I want to talk a little bit about damages when representing officers. But as with any client, it's very important to get to the emotional impact of the bad acts on our clients. But with officers, it may be much more difficult to get these, in particular because of the environment that we're in, the environment that they work in. You know, some still feel that their peers will look down on them or think that they're weak because they have emotional suffering. They'll think they'll be ridiculed by their peers. They won't be as tough necessarily. And again, everything comes back to trust, but it's going to take the trust between us and our client to get this information out of them. I've had officers downplay their emotional injuries because of these reasons. You know, they say, yeah, it was bad, but, you know, I could still do the job and I'm fine. And we want to gain their trust and get to the root cause of what happened to their injuries and the impact of them. Their concern, there's fears that some have that they could lose their job if they have too much of emotional distress, meaning that they fear that their department is going to go and make them do some type of fitness for duty evaluation where they send them to a doctor or they send them to a psychiatrist or a psychologist and say, hey, he said in his deposition that he has these issues. We don't think he can work anymore, doctor. What do you think? And these are some fears that officers have. And when I draft lawsuits, if the officer is still working at the agency, I always put in my lawsuit that the emotional distress they suffered is the type that a reasonable person who has been discriminated, harassed, retaliated against would suffer under similar circumstances. I try to do that to avoid them from getting psychiatric evaluations and be sent to fitness for duties by their employer. And although it is a form of retaliation, if they do that, it's still the client has to go through that, and they don't want to go through that. There's a fear that they could lose their job. There's a fear that they could get their firearm taken away from them. That if they're retired, they could, you know, a lot of them can still carry a firearm, that the department will take that privilege away from them. So if we can address these fears in witness prep and tell them, whether it be that, hey, we're not claiming any type of emotional distress that's beyond what a reasonable person would get. That means anyone else who suffers discrimination or retaliation under these circumstances would have these same injuries. So this is not something that they can go and take your job away from you, take your livelihood away from you, send you to all these evaluations for. Especially in, I do the employment cases, and especially in our employment cases where the hypocrisy, the lies, the betrayal, those are the emotional stool, the legs of the emotional stool, but those are the things that drive our damages up for us. And it's important to get those emotional injuries out from them. So I always try to remind them in witness prep, and I talked about this a little bit before, is that, look, these guys are taught in the academy. You're taught in the academy. You're trained. You're hit in the academy. You're taught to throw punches. You're taught that people are going to punch you. You're taught that people are going to kick you, that you could get stabbed and you got to provide first aid to somebody. You're taught that you might get feces thrown at you or in a shooting. They're taught to expect these things. And because they expect them, sometimes it may lessen the stress from them. I'm not saying there's no stress from them. There's still a great deal of stress from them. I mean, that's why they still suffer from PTSD and emotional distress. But what they don't teach them in the academy or in training or any other time is to prepare for any type of betrayal. They don't teach them to prepare for any type of hypocrisy. They don't teach them to prepare that their department is going to lie to them. They don't prepare them that the department is going to discriminate against them, is going to retaliate against them or harass them. So when these things happen, the betrayal is through the roof for these guys. You know, they're taught from the very beginning, the core is that they have to trust and believe in the department, that the department's going to have their back no matter what happens. You know, that you don't have to worry about what you do have to worry about out there are the bad guys on the street. That you don't have to worry about your bosses. You don't have to worry about the department because we'll take care of you, we'll support you. And that makes the betrayal that much worse when it happens. You know, if we think about it, betrayal is much worse when it's from somebody that we trust, that we believe supports us, that has our back. And when that person betrays us, it's much worse than when someone that's just an acquaintance or something betrays us. So, and damages, we really need to, when we're doing the witness prep portion of damages, we really need to work with our clients to get that information out. And I'm beating it like a dead horse, but there's a reason behind it. But if we don't have trust with them, we're not going to be able to get that. We need to get that trust with them. It's very important to make them feel safe, to let them know that no matter what, we're going to support them. And when we do things like that, again, it builds that trust for them, because the damages they suffer are deep in there. But they'll talk to us and they'll get us out. They'll get the information out as long as we trust them. So I'm just going to recap here and then I'll be done if there's any questions. The most important thing that their expectations of us are communication. We have to get that communication with them. It's very important for them because they're prompt, they arrive on time, if not early, and they expect the same from all of us. Understand their fears, okay? It helps us build a better relationship with them, build better trust with them. This is just a small sample size of the focus group that I did. But, you know, knowing a lot of these officers, I think it's indicative of a larger group. I think many of them have this fear that they're going to be second guessed and charged with something criminally. And we got to understand that and address that issue with them when we're going to do witness prep. And I think that's pretty much it. If anybody has any questions, Ryan, do we have any questions? Yeah, you cut out on the beginning on my end. What was the beginning part of the question? Yeah, I mean, look, they have a profession where, and rightfully so, they're held to a higher standard, right? Because ultimately they could take someone's life. They have the power to do that, and they should be held to a higher standard. But we have to remember that they are human beings, and the way to um, communicate with them better is to at least have an understanding of that, is to understand that these decisions that they have to make are difficult. They're split second decisions that none of us would want to make. None of us would want to make a decision whether to have to use force on somebody or not in less than a second. When we as lawyers or as the community look at things, we have half an hour of watching things in slow motion, over and over again, rewinding them, different angles, talking to different people. And this isn't a luxury that they have out there when they're doing their work. So to help better facilitate the relationship between an attorney and an officer, it's important to understand those things. I'm not saying you have to agree with everything that they do, but it's important to understand these concerns they fear, that these fears that they have, that they're human, right? They don't have the ability when they're out there, when someone's got their hand in a jacket and they raise it up, they don't have the ability to pause it and see, hey, do they have anything in there? Is there a different angle I can look at? They don't have that luxury. So it will help facilitate the trust, the relationship between them, between the community, between us, is just by merely understanding what they have to go through. I'm not saying we have to agree with everything that they do, but at least if we understand it, then we can help better represent them when the time comes. Okay. Well, thank you everybody for tuning in here, and I appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you, Bijan. And thank you to all of you who joined us for this week's episode of Fridays with Keenan's Cutting Edge. If you liked today's video, please click that thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe and sign up for alerts so you don't miss an episode. This podcast is about delivering what you want to hear, so don't be shy about sharing topic ideas with us. As Papa Don always says, you want to know more about it, chances are someone else does too. Next week, we have Joe Tunstall out of North Carolina, who will be sharing with us on a topic we can never hear too much about in this line of work: stress relief. I look forward to learning from Joe with all of you. Have a wonderful weekend, and I'll see you next time.